Hey, welcome to today's webinar. Um, I don't know about you, but I know that I have seen lots of struggles with corporate communications over my careers with several companies. And I've seen, change fall flat. I've seen initiatives die. I've seen um, CEOs and leaders step on their own feet by bad messaging. I've seen rumor mills destroy cultures in companies. And all of those things are terrible, but they're also all fixable. And today we have April Curlew with us from Gentenuity, and she is a communications expert, some internal, but also external communications. And so today I'd love to welcome April. So, April, how are you?
I'm great, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So let's get this out of the way so everybody hears it. Uh, why should people listen to you today?
Well, I've worked for 6 different companies in my career. I tend to stay for a pretty long time at each company, and it's ranged from 18 employees to more than 30,000 employees. And the one thing that's consistent is how communications happens at each one of these organizations. It seems to be universal. All of the same issues happen everywhere, and all of the same successes tend to happen everywhere.
Wow. Well, that's actually a great segue into my first question here. If internal communications is done really well, what does it look like, and how can that change outcomes on a team?
Oh my gosh, it's everything. Communications is not all the corporate communications function. Communications lies with the executive team all the way right down to manager level. And to some extent, even team leaders and, project leaders who don't have a manager title have a big influence on how communications happens. And what it looks like when it's successful is engaged employees, informed employees, probably a much better outcome for the business in terms of ROI, and a place that people really want to work and stay.
That's great. It's funny. I talked a little bit about, excuse me. I talked a little bit about having some CEOs with 2 left feet from a communications point of view. A lot of times stepping on their own message. So building on what you just said, like how do things break down at the top? Like how do you handle the most common executive behaviors,
Yeah,
the ones that undercut the plan in the moment?
you mentioned messaging. Messaging is vitally important. I don't want to diminish the need for that and the value for that, but first and foremost, before even staying on message, I think a leader, a CEO, or an executive has to understand how they set the tone for the entire organization. So if they're actually behaving in a way that's counter to the company values, or if they accelerate a project because technology is ready, even if people are not, haven't been communicated to, haven't been trained, that's a huge problem. And so everybody down the chain from the leadership of the organization picks up cues about how to communicate from that leader of the organization. I think sometimes the CEO and the leadership teams tend to keep things from their communications team until they feel like it's ready to bring them in. And that's almost always a big mistake, because the comms team, if they're good, and they should be at any size organization, they have their finger on the pulse of what's happening. They understand what schedules look like. They understand where the pains are in the organization and where the opportunities lie. And the comms team can actually partner with the leadership team to create a strategy that makes all of it flow more smoothly and much more successful. I think another thing is, I see this all the time. Every organization, every single organization I've been with, I think executives, especially C-level executives, tend to rely too much on what their competitors are doing or what their friends and peers are doing. I can't tell you the number of times where my team has had to drop everything because so-and-so posted a really cool video on LinkedIn, and now we have to do the same. Or we had alignment on cultural, what holidays and so forth we were going to celebrate and which ones we weren't. But then some competitor posts about a holiday that we hadn't planned to commemorate, and all of a sudden we have to drop everything and do that. So I think having confidence in your comms team that they understand what's right and wrong to communicate to the teammates is a really big plus for any leader.
Yeah, chasing messages instead of planning messages, in my experience anyway, is
Yeah,
never a good strategy.
great way to put it.
It's a bad one. And it's funny too. You talked about values a little bit. Um, when the same CEOs that talk about transparency or have transparency on the wall in the break room as one of their
Yeah,
values are the same people that are saying, "Don't tell them that yet." They don't.
exactly.
It's on a need to know basis, and they don't need to
That's
know.
it's such a big red flag when leadership and managers say one thing and the values that are communicated say something else. That's employees pick up on that pretty darn quick. It's what I call it's what's allowed to get away with around here.
Mhm.
So it's the ways people bypass the system, the way they treat each other, the way they get their work done in order to meet their goals. All of those things lead into the culture of an organization.
So one of the things that happens, I think, when leaders step on their own message is that it starts the rumor mill.
Mhm.
We always say in human resources that if you don't supply a story or a message, your employees will make one up,
They
and you
absolutely
probably won't like it. So, so how do you? Is there a way to use the rumor mill instead of fighting against it?
absolutely. The first step is to understand it. The first step is to understand what matters to your employees. And generally speaking, the rumor mill is a great indication of that. They will almost always pick up on things that affect them personally. It could be anything from benefit costs going up to a potential acquisition or merger or anything that's happening externally. So when you start hearing any kind of rumblings from your rumor mill, in my experience, there's always been a grain of truth to it. I never really know where it starts, but what I do know is that you've got what I call thought leaders within an organization. They may not have a leadership title of any kind, they may not have anybody reporting to them, but because of the way they work and the way they approach their work and the way they work with other people, people listen to them. And when they have something to say, everybody is all ears because it tends to be true, it tends to be accurate, and it helps people come to terms when there's a vacuum of information. So to use the rumor mill to your advantage, I would say it's vitally important to know who those people are, to know who those thought leaders are within your organization. And chances are pretty good that they're your high performers. They're the ones who are working, 10, 11 hours a day because assignments get given to them because they get done.
Mhm.
Those tend to be your thought leaders. But regardless of who they are, it's important for leadership to understand who they are. And, those are great for if it's a large enough organization and there's room for some kind of two-way coaching, if you will, those are the people you want to listen to. If you have an opportunity as a leader to hear from one of those internal thought leaders, you should definitely listen because they are as close as it gets to the pulse of the employee population.
I love how you're using thought leader here because it's a different application of the same phrase.
Mhm.
Most people think of thought leaders as experts on a specific topic. Like maybe people think I'm a thought leader on human resources and learning and development, or you on communications. But what you're talking about here is actually a thought leader within a network, someone who
Mhm.
is who is the mind of the organization. And I often find it interesting that the org chart that sits over here, the formal org chart, and the thought leader network matrix or network diagram, they look completely different. And the people who are running the company are often the people who are running the network. They're not the org. It's like the informal org chart, which is really
Absolutely.
interesting.
Yeah,
Um, and those people control culture too, because it's culture's
absolutely.
not what you say, culture's what you do, what your habits are. What
Yeah.
it feels like to go to bed on Sunday night knowing you have to be at work on Monday. Uh, so with that in mind, I know from experience and from working with you in the past that the communications department or function can't control the culture.
Mm-mm.
They can be part of helping create and talk about a culture. But talk to me a little bit about how internal comms communications can support and grow a culture as it exists.
Well, we've said a couple of times that culture, regardless of what the company handbook says or the recruiting ads say, a company's culture is what the employees actually do, what leaders actually do. So it's important that communications understand that. They understand and they know where there are problems, because they can reinforce those things that are going well and call attention to those to exemplify what the culture is. But it's also things like assessing process and policy and the timing of communications. All of those things can be influenced by the comms team and can definitely help with culture. Another big area is almost every organization of any size does some sort of an employee satisfaction survey. And the results that come back from that they really are solid gold. And your comms team, if the HR team or whoever was running the survey can give the results, the raw results without any personal data to the communications team, they can pick out exactly where and how to focus to address some of those culture problems. So most of the time, the team that runs that is reluctant to give over the raw data.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm telling you, if you trust your comms person, they will absolutely do you a favor by coming up with a strategy to address some of those measures. They cannot do it in a vacuum. The communications has to match what is actually happening in the organization. But if the organization, for example, using the survey again, if the organization truly wants to have employees more engaged, then they will communicate to the organization what they're going to be addressing. Here are the top 5 pain points, and here's what we're going to do about it. Whether it's forming committees, whether it's doing more research, whether it's addressing a policy right away, they need to do it, and then they need to communicate that they've done it, and then they need to re-communicate that they've done it, and they need to hold people accountable for the new way of doing things. And that holding people accountable, it's another thing that comes at every level, because as soon as you let somebody get away with something, or they cut corners or bully somebody into delivering what they want them to deliver, then your culture is going right back in the other direction.
Yeah, it's funny. Just a quick anecdote about the power of internal comms is I worked for a company. We rolled out a new engagement survey, and we did quite well. The scores were relatively good. And one of the questions on the survey was, were changes made as of the result of the last survey?
Mm-hmm.
And that question performed really poorly. And I think it was somewhere around 35% out of 100, which is ridiculous. So even though the overall engagement scores were good, when asked that question, people they felt like no, it wasn't. No changes were made. So I just happened to run the internal comms team at that time for this company, and so we made a change immediately that every communication that went out after this would now say, as of a result, or as of the result of your answers on the survey,
right.
comma, we ... And so we just started communicating that with everything that went out. Now, only if it was true, of course. Some changes don't happen because of the survey, but everything that did happen as a result of the survey, we said that that phrase, and the next year we scored 85% on that question. And so just that one phrase at the beginning of a sentence was the difference between a 35-ish percent score and an 85% score. And that's the power of an internal communications team doing their job. So kudos to you.
I thank you. I think that also boils down to the topic of the communication. My last employer in particular it was difficult to communicate the company's strategy to the organization because it was long-term, and there were so many moving parts that didn't touch most employees directly on a day-to-day basis. What you're going to find with the surveys, or pretty much anything when it comes to communications, is that you have much higher engagement when the teammates or the employees feel like it's benefiting them personally. If it's about the company or the company's performance, that's a little too kind of vague for the standard employees to understand. So they tend to ignore it. And you can communicate 5, 10, 15 times on some topics and never get the engagement that you want. Or you can communicate once or twice on another topic that has direct impact on pay, time off, any of those personal things, and you'll get, tremendous engagement. Feedback whether you want it or not.
Yes. It's funny that that leads me to another thought on this, which is, and I struggle with this too in human resources, is the I hate to use the cliche boil the ocean, but I think it fits really well here. What about somebody if they come to you and just say, "Hey, April, I need you to write me a communication that makes our employees happier," or something like that, where it's just this
Yes.
broad. We want to communicate, that we provide good work-life balance, or something like that. That's just so broad. There's no real message in it. So how do you steer the conversation towards like one point that you can communicate? Because you just said, even if you say it 15 times, sometimes it doesn't stick. So a broad message is definitely not going to. How do you fix that when
Yeah.
you're
Well,
talking to leaders?
some things can't be fixed with communications alone. Some things require leadership intervention, but I probably would dig a little bit more into what they're asking for. What is it that you're seeing that leads you to believe that engagement is poor, or what do you think would help? And chances are good that it's going to be a behavior or an action rather than a message. But if we do get to the point where, I would understand what the problem is and what's driving the question, maybe it's people who are supposed to work at 7:30 to 4:30 are rolling in close to 8 and leaving close to 4. Um, that's a local leadership issue. On a comms level, we can reinforce policy. We can remind people of what the, flex time attendance should look like. And we can remind managers too that, hey, this is what the policy says, and your employees are paying close attention to what other people on the team are allowed to get away with. So it would probably be kind of a tiered approach. There would be some coaching at the leadership level. There would be some training for maybe line manager level to help them understand the importance of consistency. And then all of the tools that we've mentioned before that, we have access to, like the survey and even performance management, and some of the things that we're asking people to do in order to meet their goals for the year.
Yeah, and I think there's a misunderstanding too about internal comms or communications in general. Is that the department, the communications department, and professionals do so much more than just write emails. And you just mentioned some of that. Like you can have if you have an event coming up, or if you have something that needs to be announced, the communications team typically uh, is as good as uh, basically producing a show that
Mhm.
includes communications. And I think that gets lost on people. They're like, hey, we need an email, call the comms department, instead of, hey, we need a launch strategy for this new benefits program. Let's bring comms in early and they can advise us on the best way to
Yeah.
launch this and when to communicate, and what to communicate at each time and who should do it. And those are, that advisory capacity is really important. So if maybe somebody doesn't have a communications department right now, um, or even somebody who specializes in communications, um, what do you say to them right now? Like, what we're doing sounds very complex, but I think they could probably do a good job just with the tools that they have now, and maybe some consulting support. So tell me a little bit about how somebody might be able to do or build a communications function in, say, a month or so with the tools they already have.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because there's a lot. There's a lot that has already been produced through probably the strategy department, through the HR department. You've got things like your organization's mission and vision that need to be reinforced in a number of ways. It could be through communications, but it could also be through activities or milestones throughout the year that are recognized for people. You've got your long and short-term strategic objectives for the organization. You could break that down and really go deep to help the employees understand how that affects them. Because remember, we said earlier that people tend to not pay attention to messages about strategy because they don't see how it affects them. You don't have to be a communicator to help somebody understand how they're affected by one of the company's strategies. It's not as simple always as, hey, you get to keep your job, or you get to, have better benefits. But sometimes you want to work for a leading organization. You want to have confidence and be proud of the organization that you work for. And by helping them understand some of those strategic objectives and helping them understand how their work contributes to that, they start to feel a little bit more ownership in the company's success. Most companies too, even though they've got maybe a 3 to 5 year strategy, they almost always have an annual strategy. And that can be almost the backbone of a communications plan for the organization. And anybody could do that. It could be the head of HR. In fact, that's what I've seen the most, is that in the absence of a true communications function, the HR team tends to pick that up, because just by default, they have the most things to communicate about than internally anyway, than any other organization. I would say from an external point of view, pretty much all of those things that I mentioned, the mission, the vision, the strategies, are not necessarily of any interest outside the organization. I think a lot of times leaders say, hey, we need to get some awareness for this organization. Can you get so-and-so to interview me, or to, feature us in the magazine or newspaper or whatever it happens to be? There has to be something newsworthy for them to do that. And it could be something revolutionary that organization is doing, or a new practice. Like I remember reverse mentoring was a big deal for a while, where the, more tenured employees were being mentored by the younger employees to learn technology and to get more comfortable with that kind of thing. Those are interesting to the media. But what I would say is to try and use a consultant when you do that. It's tricky sometimes to work with the media, and it's good to have somebody who's on your side who understands how to navigate that external audience, because in this day and age, it's not limited to the media. Media becomes social media. Social media becomes, that goes straight back to the employees, because they monitor that kind of thing. And if it goes south during an interview with the media, it's no time at all before your employees are aware and are jumping on the bandwagon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it doesn't take long for that to spread quickly. I'm looking at what's happening to SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, right now, and they've had a really rough 12 months, and they talk about spreading like wildfire. That was some really big mistakes in communication as a company, as an organization, both internal and external.
Yeah.
And they're paying the price for it now, because they didn't do it right to begin with, which is sad, because it's not a terrible organization. It's does a lot of good things. Right. But you wouldn't know that by reading the news right now. So to your point, make sure you have a pro, because if you do get interviewed, you think it's good. It may not be, depending on what you say.
Yeah, that's the time where messaging is vitally important, because you want to make sure that you're consistent with every audience you talk to needs to hear essentially the same message. And that's also the point where a little bit of media training can go a long way. One kind of famous example of that would be where, if a member of the media kind of accuses a leader of doing something like, isn't it true that, your salary is $1 million a year while you're cutting jobs and cutting salaries among the employees? And then if that leader decides to get defensive and say something like, it's not true, or just, kind of gets emotional about their response, that can trigger a firestorm. So you need to be prepared for those kinds of curveballs, and your comms team will help prepare leadership, because they know what reporters look for a story that grabs, because they're in business too. They're in business to attract advertisers, to get readership, and it's not mundane things that are just going smooth like peanut butter. They're looking for drama. They're looking for conflict.
Chaos sells.
Chaos sells.
Well, speaking of selling, we when you and I talked about this, we said, we'd get some people to register, and I don't know, I didn't check on how many people are on today, but I know we had quite a few registered for this. And you promised me that you would give them something for free if they join this webinar today. So for those that are still with us, and for those watching the recording, I'm assuming after the fact, tell us what they've won, April.
You have won. Earlier when you mentioned, what can you do if you don't have a communications team, and how can you actually get started? that's the gift that I have for you is I created a 2026 communications framework or calendar, largely for internal communications because they're much more planned than external communications are. But a lot of the things that are showing up in this plan will have external opportunities attached to them. So I also mentioned earlier that HR tends to drive a lot of communications just by the nature of what they do. The training department is the same, whether they're part of HR or a standalone. So a lot of what you're going to see in this plan are the things that happen throughout the year from an HR standpoint: performance management, season, merit, bonus structure, the diversity holidays, and having an approach to how you're going to celebrate and recognize those holidays. There's some tips in there about executive communications. One of my favorite tips, and we've missed one opportunity because that was Thanksgiving, but to me, the most powerful message that a CEO can send is right before Thanksgiving to thank employees for all that they've done to help the organization, and just to wish them well and happiness. And the same I tie to New Year's. A lot of CEOs will want to do a Christmas message because they have personal beliefs and they feel like Christmas is the way to go. And in some organizations that may be true, but I find New Year's is a better, it's kind of a year-end wrap, and you can say the holidays, or you can refer to that, but it's a time to be with families. It's a time to recharge your battery, to reflect on, what's important to you, and be ready to start the new year with a lot of energy and, optimism. So the big opportunity that anybody who's listening to this recording or is on this call, is to work with your leadership team and get out a message before the new year, ideally before people leave for their holiday vacations. Probably on the 19th or so is when people are starting to disappear. So you're going to be getting, I think it's like an 8-page document that outlines month by month what you can communicate. And the timelines for these tend to be the same from organization to organization. But of course, it's a living document. You can absolutely move things around and change the timing and add things that are missing for your organization and so forth. So I'll be sending that out.
Excellent. So if somebody's watching this today and they want to get in touch with you, tell me how they can do that.
Best way is to send an email to acurlew@gentenuity.com. And that's, I don't know if my name is on the screen somewhere, but it's AKERLEW@gentenuity.com.
Excellent. And if for some reason you're watching this today and you didn't get the document that April promised, then please send me an email. My email's on the screen, brian.howard@peopleless.com. You can just put comms in the subject line, and I'll reply to you with the free document that April has prepared for you. Very valuable. I've seen a lot of her work. I've had the experience of enjoying her work over the last 7 or 8 years. So I know she does good stuff.
Hey, Brian, I think I'm going to sweeten the deal.
Sweeten the deal. Okay, let's hear it.
Sweeten the deal. I'm going to send this out, and for anybody who's listening to this call, I'm going to give you a 15-minute consultation. If there's anything that you want to talk about from the plan that I send out or from a communications issue that your organization is having, I will include my phone number in the email that I send out, and I'll give you 15 minutes of free advice.
Free advice. Now that is a sweet deal because she makes me pay. Listen, I enjoyed having you today, and thanks for everybody that joined, and we'll talk again next time.
All right. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, April.